Hello, hello, and welcome to The Conversation. Every week on this show, I invite one of the most compelling and sometimes unexpected power players in Washington and beyond to talk about how they're navigating and shaping this incredible era in American politics. But first, let's talk about this week. And we can't talk about this week without talking about Jeffrey Epstein. It's the conversation in the White House. To the chagrin of President Trump, he is incredibly frustrated, furious, as one source told me this week, because it feels like he's making trade deals, he's getting his agenda passed through Congress. But every time he turns on that TV, all he sees is Jeffrey Epstein headlines, and he is sick of it. It's also plaguing Congress. Look, school is out for summer early. House Speaker Mike Johnson ended the session early so that he could avoid Democrats calling for a vote on the Epstein case. So this has infiltrated basically every part of Washington at this point, but there are some other really important things going on, including a big conversation about our nation's health. You've heard about the MAHA movement. Some of you may feel part of the Make America Healthy Again tribe. Well, this week, I sat down with FDA Commissioner Marty Makary. The FDA is part of this group of the nation's health officials working on a report that is due to the president in August, basically giving some big recommendations about our nation's health. I talked to Makary about what to expect out of that report. I also talked to him about the FDA's plans to define, quote, ultra-processed foods. Can you believe it? There's no definition for it. I know you've all been talking about it, but we don't have an official definition, and that's going to have some really big implications. Plus, the pressure that the FDA is facing, both from the MAHA movement that wants to see some big changes, in addition to industry groups, whether that's farms and agriculture or pharmaceutical companies, big food companies that also want to have a say in the direction of our nation's health policy. Plus, you may have heard the FDA and HHS overall made some massive cuts to staffing under the DOGE cuts. How is that impacting the functionality of this really important regulatory agency? So a ton to talk about. Here's my interview with Marty Makary. Marty, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, good to meet you, Dasha.
We're having this conversation at quite a milestone for the Trump administration, 6 months in office. Your boss, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has a massive mandate to really overhaul the nation's approach to health. Where are you in that overhaul process, would you say?
Yeah, we've been busy. I've been in office just over 100 days, and it is exciting to see this MAHA movement sweep across the country. It got a lot of momentum during the campaign, and people connect with it. Voters connected with it. Republican, Democrat, Independent moms showed up in high numbers to vote for President Trump over this agenda that Secretary Kennedy has been talking about. And it makes sense. There are big issues in healthcare and medicine in my career that you see are not talked about that need to be talked about. We're talking about root causes of the chronic disease surge that's going on right in front of our eyes with this generation. And just talking about more treatments, more chemo, more medication is not the holistic view of this entire thing. So people are appropriately asking, why are 40% of our nation's children now diagnosed with a chronic disease? Why is obesity so high? Why are sperm counts down? Why do 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 girls now go on to have an autoimmune disease in their lifetime? These were things that were rare a generation ago. So it's exciting. It's refreshing. We're taking a fresh new approach to a lot of these issues. And at the FDA, we have a big role because the F in FDA stands for food, not federal, as one employee thought.
Your goals are big, and a lot of people are excited about them, but they're also really challenging. A lot of those goals are kind of at odds with interests of some of the industries that you regulate, right? Pharma, agriculture, big food companies. How are you balancing those interests that are often competing?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, we want to go bold, and there are a lot of things to do, but we also want to find common ground and work incrementally, which is why we started with taking action to remove the 9 petroleum-based food dyes from the U.S. food supply, something where there's like 93% public support in the United States. And we can actually get a lot more done by using our power to convene stakeholders and appeal to them and come up with a consensus on a time frame and how it's going to be done. And they know we've got other tools in our toolbox, but the convening power alone at FDA is a big thing, and it
but
was
even
very
that, like, there are some companies that aren't too happy to comply with your request to voluntarily take those dyes out.
You see, there's a sort of a natural history of these movements. So, for example, when there was efforts to recognize the medical harms of added sugar in food, you saw resistance from the industry. Then you saw some brands making the move and even advertising low sugar or no sugar. And that drove more education. Why are they advertising no sugar? You saw this with nutrition labeling. The industry opposed nutrition labeling. They said, we're going to lose jobs and, people were going to die and, food prices were going to surge. None of that happened. Instead, you had an informed public that over time began to learn the ingredients. And then the same food manufacturers and food companies that were not excited about it were then using that to promote their products and compete with their. So we want to make sure there's a level playing field. Some companies are appropriately saying we don't want to do this unilaterally and give an unfair advantage to our competitors, which is why it was so exciting to see the Consumer Brand Association come along with a big pledge. And so we're going to keep an eye on this. We keep doing meetings. I just had a meeting with the Mars company yesterday.
They're one of the kind of holdouts. I mean, what is the stick and the carrot and stick approach here?
Yeah, so I think my opinion is they haven't gotten a good rap in the media that accurately represents their willingness. I think we're going to get there with Mars. I'm very impressed with the meetings that we've had with them. I think they have some constraints right now and that are making it difficult for them to come out publicly. But I think they're going to be very impressive, and they've already taken a move on another chemical in the food supply that we have been concerned about, and that is titanium dioxide. And so they have actually announced removing titanium dioxide. There's like 1,000 chemicals in the U.S. food supply that are banned in Europe and other countries.
All of this stuff, takes time and takes all this consensus building.
Yeah.
What do you say to some of the folks in the MAHA movement that want these big sweeping changes, or expecting that from you, want you to put the screws to some of these companies? Should they lower their expectations?
The feedback I get is, great job and keep going. So when we announced this, there were naysayers that said, oh, this is not real. They're not going to do it. Why would a big food company actually agree to this? We made tremendous progress in the several weeks since the announcement. So I think we're going to build on this momentum. I think you win more bees with honey than fire, and I think we're making huge progress using that convening power. And we want to keep doing it. We've been convening experts on hormone replacement therapy for perimenopausal women. We just did that giant roundtable last week. There are calls for us to remove the warnings on hormone replacement therapy for perimenopausal women. And so we're taking a look at that. We had another roundtable Monday on SSRIs, the antidepressant in pregnancy. At least one causes birth defects, and yet 5% of pregnant women are on an SSRI. And so we want to have civil discourse. Controversy is good in science when we're debating.
You got some criticism on both of those. People said you were maybe over-indexing on the benefits of HRTs and also under-indexing on the benefits of SSRIs.
Under it. So, there's always going to be some opinions out there, but we got tremendous positive feedback. For 22 years, 50+ million American women have not been offered or not been told about the long-term health benefits of replacing their body's estrogen with estrogen replacement therapy. And just to give you a sense of the dramatic long-term health benefits, the number one cause of death in women is heart disease. It cuts the risk of fatal heart attacks in half, or somewhere between 25 to 50%, depending on the study. You talk about a public health intervention that can have tremendous health benefits. There may be no medication that helps the health of a population, specifically women, more than HRT.
It's so interesting. So many friends of mine who are getting older and having to interact with the health system more have talked about how infuriating it is as a woman, because it does feel like the system doesn't do enough research into this. Why do you think that gap has existed for so long?
Look, I've thought about this a lot as a physician. So women's health issues have not gotten the attention, the funding, or the appreciation that they should.
There's a lot of us out here.
And there's a lot. There's a lot. I think it's a number of reasons. I think there's been a male-dominated culture, to be very frank, in the medical profession that preceded our generation, and I think we're still dealing with the remnants. I think the fear machine with certain things takes on a life of their own, be it natural saturated fats. It became demonized, and basically the entire health community said, avoid fat. For 50 years, the medical field got that wrong. We said opioids were not addictive for over 20 years. We got hormone replacement therapy wrong for 22 years, scaring women, saying that, it increases your risk of dying of breast cancer when no clinical trial has ever supported that finding. So we want to have a healthy discourse and debate. So if somebody has a different opinion, good. That's the kind of debate we want to have. And so that is part of the way we advance science, through debate, through discussion.
At a certain point, though, the FDA, a regulatory body, though, has to issue some decisions and give some clarity to the public, right?
Yeah, so we're going to have to make a decision about whether or not to remove the warning label on estrogen, vaginal estrogen, and systemic estrogen. And so, look, we've had petitions, we've had calls for it. I'm just new into office, but I thought, let's listen to the experts. Let's have a public comment period. We're getting those comments in now in the public comment period, and let's make a decision.
And is that the direction you're heading, removing that warning label?
I want to do this as a team. I've got my own opinion on it, which I think is not a secret. But the way to do these things is to go through the proper process, get all the public input, get it summarized, listen to the stakeholder groups, and then have a group make that decision.
But with something like that, it's not just opinion, right? You do need, science and evidence in order
scientific opinions.
Yeah.
Scientific opinions.
One of the big things I know that the MAHA Commission is working on, which the FDA is part of, is this strategy document that's due, I believe, August 12th, as a part of this aim to end childhood chronic disease. Where are you in that process? What can we expect out of this strategy?
Look, I think people want to know how we are starting to fund research differently to address root causes. People want to know how we are addressing some of these big blind spots in American medicine. Maybe we need to talk more about school lunch programs, not just putting every 6-year-old on Ozempic. Maybe we need to talk about glycemic addiction when we talk about obesity, not just insulin. We've got to talk about the whole list. We got to talk about environmental exposures that may cause cancer, not just the chemo to treat cancer. So that entire framework is part of this entire report. So look, there's new funding priorities at the NIH to address root causes. We're taking initiatives to speed up the delivery of cures and meaningful treatments by cutting the red tape and the idle time in the review process at the FDA. It's really a broad HHS initiative. So we have a part of that report, but it's really part of a broader initiative.
One example I'm really curious to get your take on is pesticides, because a MAHA report in May called pesticides a danger to people's health. Secretary Kennedy has been really outspoken on this, but the White House came out and said that they won't be touching pesticides and that the August report won't include them. Is that still the plan, to exclude pesticides from the report?
I haven't heard that plan. What I've been told is that identify the key issues in the areas where we've made progress at the FDA and submit that contribution to the broader MAHA report.
Let's talk about ultra-processed foods, because you guys are working on a definition for that, which is wild that we've been talking about processed foods for so long, but we don't have a definition.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? How are you figuring that out, and what are you taking into account as you're working to define this thing?
Yeah, so this is a good example of where we want to use our convening power to get public input and figure out where is there a line where we have more significant health concerns than simply processed foods. So there's sort of raw foods and whole foods and things you eat right out of the ground or from a farm. And then there's our processed foods, which could be as simple as taking good, healthy foods and putting them in a can.
Right, they're not all the same, right?
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's bad for you just because it's processed. I mean, cutting a cucumber could be processed, cucumber. And then there's what we call ultra-processed. So we kind of know what it is in the medical field. We know what we're talking about. It's the bars you buy that look like health bars, you turn it over, and it's got 35 ingredients.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so how do you really describe that group of foods that we know are designed for high shelf life. We know they're loaded with chemicals. And how do we encourage people to eat more wholesome foods and natural foods and things with fiber and complex carbohydrates instead of simple carbohydrates? So that's the task, that's the charge. And so we're going to do our best to try to
And the implications are going to be pretty significant, right? I mean, this could impact school lunches. This could impact what people on SNAP have access to, right?
Yeah, if we come up with a good definition, there could be a lot of implications of having that definition. Now, maybe we won't get it right on the first definition because there's no perfect definition.
It's new.
Yeah, that's if we're showing humility and we're being honest, there's no perfect definition. This is an attempt to try to say, here's a group of foods that's generally not as healthy as more wholesome foods, things you cook instead of buy pre-made, for example. So look, this is part of the challenge, and we're up for it. So there are implications. The SNAP program thing. I mean, we haven't seen movement on SNAP moving to healthier options in like a million years. And here we have now waivers at the state level, a recognition and awareness that sugary drinks and ultra-processed junk food doesn't make sense for taxpayer dollars. You can eat all the bad food you want. You can have, cupcakes and ding-dongs or whatever you like. You're free. Yeah, you're welcome.
You're free to do bad things to your body.
You're welcome. You can do it. You can do it. But when we are using taxpayer dollars, we got to make better decisions and not decisions based on the old misinformation of the food pyramid.
Well, so how much pressure are you getting from the people that did have input on the old food pyramid and might not want to budge on this kind of stuff?
People ask me, how much pressure do you have from this group or that group or even within the government?
We ask because, these are big changes and industry tends to be reluctant.
Yeah. The amount of pressure I feel from industry or other branches of government is zero.
Why?
Because we're...
I know they're lobbying you, but you feel inoculated to it?
We want to hear their contribution, what they have to say. They have scientists too, and their science may be different from the science that we have. We want to hear that. We definitely want to engage in that discourse. But pressure, I wouldn't say pressure. I would say people have ideas or opinions or hypotheses.
With millions and billions of dollars on the line, of course.
Well, we have an incredible tradition at the FDA of being scientifically independent. We have a great brand. We have one of the greatest brands in the world. And so we have impeccable scientists that are subject matter experts. And so we're tapping them, and we're also getting outside input.
We've talked about the food dyes and some of the chemicals. What do you say to some of the critics and health advocates that say that you guys are too much focused on dyes and additives as opposed to the bigger drivers of chronic disease like salt and sugar?
So we are talking about sugar, and that's, as you know, part of the MAHA report, and specifically simple carbohydrates not bound to fiber. And so the refined carbohydrates that constitute so much of our food basically is ultra-processed food. That's our entire discussion and even what we're talking about now in ultra-processed. So we're talking about all of it. But remember, one of the epidemics facing kids is attention deficit disorder. And we don't know why it has surged in our lifetime. You didn't see it nearly at this clip 2 generations ago. There's been an association suggested with a Lancet randomized controlled trial that did find an association with the artificial food dye and ADHD. And then you also have parents who have said over and over again, and I do think we have to listen to these parents, that when they had a child with aggressive or difficult behavior or ADHD and they eliminated all petroleum-based food dyes from the diet of the child, many parents say that they have observed the child's behavior improving. So I think we have to listen to those parents. In some cases, they would say that after a year or some period of time where the dyes have been eliminated, they are then reintroduced. That's just because it's hard to stay away from them in the modern world now with kids,
particularly in the U.S.
Birthdays and Halloween, it's a holiday or someone's birthday every week. When they do get reintroduced or the parent feels comfortable and they get lax and they get reintroduced, they notice the kid's behavior regress back to that aggressive or attention deficit behavior. And then when they eliminate it again, it goes back to being normal. So that is data. It's not a randomized controlled trial, but it is data that we can add to the data that we use to say at what level of concern can we do a relatively cost-neutral swap for natural dyes. Now, normally the FDA would approve a natural dye every couple years. That is a natural color from natural ingredients. We've approved 4 in the 3 months that I've been at FDA, and we'll probably approve 2 more in the next couple months. And so we believe in options, and I think it's a move that people welcome. It's not a silver bullet. It's a starting point, and it's very popular.
And I know it's very popular. And I know you've talked about this a little bit before, but like, why is there such a gap between what companies in Europe have been allowed or not allowed to do versus here? I mean, you just don't see the same ingredients overseas as you do in the US. Were previous iterations of the FDA wrong in what they allowed, or what's happened here?
So we're challenging an old standard called the GRAS standard that basically governed the ingredients that could be introduced into the US food supply. And GRAS stands for, it's an acronym for generally recognized as safe. So if an ingredient was sort of self-declared as safe by the industry that, brewed it up in the lab, then the FDA would basically say, well, then it falls under GRAS, and we don't really look at it.
Secretary Kennedy has also talked about creating new dietary guidelines, I think, to be written by the end of the summer. Where's the progress on that so far?
Yeah, so we're making progress. We are going to end the 70-year war on fat that began with Dr. Ansel Keys. After Eisenhower had his heart attack, Ansel Keys basically rose up and said he had too much fat. But there was this active debate in the medical field whether or not saturated fat actually caused heart disease or not. 3 giant studies, including the largest clinical trial ever done, failed to identify an association between saturated fat intake and heart disease. And so the debate had ended, I'd say, in the late 70s, early 80s, because it was the groupthink in medicine, if you will. Well, we all know it's fat. It was the leading theories. All of a sudden, it went from a healthy discourse to dismissing and sort of censoring scientists that had the view that it was refined carbohydrates. And now we know it really was the refined carbohydrates because it drove inflammation. Simple carbohydrates like added sugar, refined carbohydrates increase inflammation, probably the chemicals that we take, all the stuff that we talked about banned in Europe.
I mean, in Europe, as you said, they have banned a bunch of this stuff. Have you considered just outright banning some of these things that you say are significantly harmful, especially to children?
So generally, we want to increase information. We want to educate the public. We want to get more studies. We want to give people more options, right? That's the American way, right? You can have those ding-dongs and Twinkies or whatever people like, but we want to educate the public. And there is this powerful effect. But if we can identify what is most concerning in terms of human health, then we can use that information for where the government spends its taxpayer dollars on food.
One thing that we know is bad for Americans' health and have known for a long time, smoking. The FDA previously said that limiting nicotine in cigarettes, as proposed by the Biden administration, would avert some 4.3 million deaths and prevent 48 million youth and young adults from starting the habit of cigarette smoking by the end of the century. Should this be a bigger MAHA priority? And will you finalize limits on nicotine in cigarettes and maybe ban menthol cigarettes?
Our focus is on stopping children from starting nicotine products from scratch, namely child vaping. We have a child vaping epidemic. And so that is a giant problem right in front of our faces, and it has been ignored. You go to any vape store in the United States, what are you going to find? 85% of the vaping products are illegal Chinese products, and no one has paid attention to this issue. So I don't want to see kids starting vaping from scratch. It's a nicotine delivery device. Kids now from good families are addicted. They know they're addicted. They want to stop. They can't stop. And so there's this addiction path. If you noticed in your neighborhood, I don't know where you live, I would bet that there's a vape store that has opened within 3 blocks of your home, if I had to guess.
Yeah, and there are cigarettes being sold in most of the stores around too. I mean, are you interested in tackling that as well, or is your focus almost exclusively on vaping right now?
No, our focus is on everything. But so combustible cigarettes are the most dangerous product of the nicotine products that are commonly consumed. We've got 30 million smokers in the United States. There are products with less harm And so sometimes doctors will transition people from combustible cigarettes to other nicotine delivery products. My concern, though, is that you have illegal Chinese vaping products that are video game vaping devices. That is, they literally have an electronic video game on the vaping device with a port. So you play and then vape at the same time. They're designed to get kids addictive. They're in vape stores in the United States. By the way, I find in the medical establishment, people have no idea what's in these vape stores. I'll ask experts in public health, have you actually been to the vape stores? Have you seen what's in there? Do you know what 7-OH is? It's a synthetic concentrated byproduct of kratom that has opioid binding properties. You can just buy it in some of these stores. So I think the medical establishment has been out of touch on some of these issues.
How do you regulate this?
We're going to do everything we can because, first of all, we have a crisis of these illegal Chinese vaping products. We don't want them in this country. They come in through our ports. And the FDA, we found out, when I find out a lot when I came into the FDA, we were refusing them, and then the illegal Chinese vape products go right back on the ship, and the ship goes to another U.S. port. It's called port shopping, and 100% of it gets in. They're laughing at us. And we don't even put import blocks on some of these companies. So we're doing a lot. We have a big law enforcement division at the FDA. We've got almost 300 people with guns and badges. We go to the ports. We're increasing that effort. I myself am going to be at one of these ports soon. We confiscated $35 million worth of illegal vaping products just about a month and a half ago. We made that announcement. This is a big issue in America. Again, in one of the blind spots of modern medicine.
Well, and all of this stuff is just advancing, so much faster than I think a lot of the systems have been able to keep up with. I want to ask, one of the things that's happened with the advent of telemedicine is this debate over the abortion pill. I know you're under some pressure from Senator Josh Hawley and others to limit access to mifepristone via telehealth and via mail. Is that something that you're taking a look at?
First of all, just to reiterate, I don't feel I'm under pressure from anybody. Now, people have opinions, but I don't have any preconceived plans.
But is that an issue that's on the table for you, or you're not looking at that?
We always talk about every issue, and we talk about them continuously. We have an ongoing review of safety data on mifepristone, which is a requirement from the prior administrations that have something called a REMS in place. A new drug-drug interaction with mifepristone could emerge in the data, in which case we'd have to take action on it. So, you always have to be open-minded. You have to listen to different opinions and make decisions based on what you think is the right thing to do.
But specifically limiting the telehealth and mail for mifepristone, is that on the table?
I have no preconceived plans to make any changes to the mifepristone policies. We're going to continue to look at the data, and we're going to continue to listen to folks that say they have concerns about coercion of girls who are pregnant. That is, they're being forced to take mifepristone that's available outside the prescribing authority of a physician, or an abusive power imbalance from the male in the relationship. And so we have to listen to what's happening in the field and ask, what can we do to do our part?
I do want to talk about the state of the FDA, sort of big
it's great.
picture.
It's great. The FDA is strong.
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion in the public in the wake of all of the DOJ stuff and all of the cuts and everything about, where are there surpluses of people? Where are there shortages of people? I mean, what you guys do here is absolutely critical. You are keeping Americans safe. This spring, the FDA laid off 3,500 people as part of this larger reduction in the workforce at
Actually,
HHS.
It was like about 2,000 and maybe a quarter to a third were reinstated.
So that's what I was going to ask. So how many people were actually laid off? How many people did you bring back? Like, what's the state of the workforce now?
Yeah, so first of all, good question. I'm glad you asked it. So first of all, no scientific reviewer or inspector was laid off at the FDA, contrary to some of the headlines that have been out there. There were 12 travel offices at the FDA. There were nearly 2,000 HR people and budget procurement staff. And so the reason why you had so many communications and IT and duplicative services was because there was a fiefdom culture. between the centers. So there's 6 major centers at the FDA, and they would build their own kingdoms. And so these giant fiefdoms were all doing duplicative things when it could have been one adverse event reporting database. So we consolidated IT, HR, travel offices, and some budget procurement and HR staff to be centralized and to create more teamwork at the agency.
So how many people that were initially sort of riffed were brought back?
I'd say roughly a quarter. I mean, several hundred. And so look, my job when I got there after the reduction in force was to do an assessment and figure out who should we bring back and, how should we restructure the agency to make sure that all the scientists and inspectors and law enforcement people have all the resources
for
they
the
need.
people that saw all of these headlines around Doge, right? There was a lot of concern, especially when it came to agencies that do super critical work. Can you assure the public that the FDA has the people and the resources it needs to fulfill its mission?
Yes, and let me tell you that we have targets for our decisions with reviewing devices and drugs and generics and biosimilars. And so those target dates are set by Congress, and we are on track to meet all those target dates this year. And we may have a record number of approvals this year. One fact you'll never hear in those headlines about, the collapse of the FDA or something like that, when we're really consolidating people like travel offices, is that the FDA doubled in the number of employees from 2007 to last year. There were about 9,000 employees. Roughly the same number of drugs were approved. 9,000, just over 9,000 in 2007. Nearly 20,000 just last year. And so the agency ballooned up. Now, was it a massive expansion in scientific reviewers? No, it was a massive expansion in the fiefdom culture of the FDA.
So then do you think more people should be laid off here?
Right now, I would say, I think my job is to make sure right now the trains are running on time, that we're doing our job with food inspections, that we're investigating outbreaks. And I feel good at where we are right now. We are hiring scientists. We've got hundreds of positions for scientific reviewers posted, and we're going to continue to hire, and we're going to do that continuously. We're not going to ever be done hiring scientists because of that turnover rate. Some
of our health reporters have talked to a few different companies that have said you guys have sent recent complete response letters that either had some surprises or weren't previously raised by the FDA or decided not to approve a drug and they were kind of taken aback by it. What do you say to those companies that are concerned about the processes here? I stand behind the decisions that we've made on products. They're excellent decisions. There's always going to be naysayers and haters out there that said, oh, they approved this drug and they shouldn't have, or vice versa. We have amazing, outstanding talent, including our center directors. We have new leadership now in our true drug centers. We have Vinay Prasad, who has published 540 plus scientific peer-reviewed studies in his career as a tenured professor, as an epidemiologist and hematologist at UCSF. He's doing a phenomenal job running the Center for Biologics. We have George Tidmarsh now, MD, PhD from Stanford, dual-trained in neonatology and oncology with an incredible career coming to, sort of true public service at the end of his career, coming in to run our lead drug center. He didn't have to do it. He's developed, I think, 6 or 7 drugs himself. And I mean, this guy there's no more perfect person with impeccable academic credentials, impeccable training, and also some experience on the industry side to know the process from both sides. What do you say to people that say, because of his industry experience, the sort of revolving door that you guys want to keep closed is seeping into the FDA? So look, I screen the leaders that come in, and I wanted to make sure that he believes in what I believe and that is that the scientific review has to be impeccably independent, which is why one of the first actions I took at the FDA
was to remove all pharma and industry members from all FDA advisory committees wherever statutorily possible. We have to preserve that scientific review process. At the same time, we have to make the process more user-friendly, and we're only going to do that from partnering with industry and working with people who were on the other side. I was on the other side a little bit. Most of the new INDs, or investigational new drugs, come from academics, and they're looking at this gnarly process. Why does it take over 10 years for a new drug to come to market? I mean, that is a focal question that we are challenging in the way we are modernizing the agency. Do we really think if you have the cure for breast cancer, we should just tell the public, give it the 7 to 8 year process that where we can get it out in the expedited way? No, I mean, we have to start using common sense. I mean, when drugs are approved in other countries, we were still requiring animal testing at the FDA.
There are reasons why this stuff takes a long time, too. I know so many people are frustrated, but the FDAs of prior administrations would argue we really didn't make sure this stuff is safe before we start giving it to people. So how do you expedite while keeping people safe?
So I agree. We've got to make public safety is number one. But pondering the results of a clinical trial for 10 months does not increase the safety of that evaluation. You want to take as much time as it needs, and you need to make a decision at some point. And the reason why it takes long, if we're being honest, is not that they're pondering safety for nearly a year.
What are they doing?
It is that we have these targets set up by statute to get decisions out by, say, 10 months or 12 months, depending on the type of product. And then there are multiple offices involved. And so each office this office may have 4 months, that office may have 6 months to get their part done. So why would anyone get it done in 2 weeks if they have to wait for everyone else to do their part? So it's just a byproduct.
So it's too much redundancy?
It's just an old system from the 1960s. We can run more continuous trials. We can have clinical endpoints in the cloud for reviewers to look onto. We can use AI in our scientific reviews to help organize these enormous files and fetch studies from the literature to help inform the scientists. And we can use the idle time during a clinical trial when we're waiting for the results. We can use that to get started on the application and get through the lion's share of the application, which is the manufacturing proposal and data.
So I really want to ask about AI because that is a conversation everywhere, including here. I know you guys have a tool called ELSA that you're trying to implement. There are concerns, though, from people. You know, we've seen AI, even in the original MAHA report, hallucinate studies and, become sometimes more of a burden than an assist. And when you're talking about stuff that's so important, like the review process for drugs, there's a world in which it could speed it up, but there's a world in which it could cause problems. So, like, what do you say to people who are worried about sort of non-humans getting involved in something so important?
I would say this. I would say, first of all, does Google hallucinate? If you ask Google a question, is it giving you 100% accurate information?
Yeah, but Google's not telling me not approving my drugs.
Neither is our AI. So our AI is used to organize these giant applications to ensure the formatting of the tables is correct. And so it'll screen a flag. Now, the human also reviews the formatting and the entire application, but normally we have multiple checks. Now, if the AI can screen, here's a clear formatting issue, then the reviewer goes in and can look and give it a second look. Now, they're already doing a first look, but the most important thing to know about the AI at the FDA is that it's an optional tool for our scientific reviewers. They use it completely on a voluntary basis. They don't have to use it. And they are using it at a very high rate because they love it. Now, AI, as you know, when people complain about the information AI is providing is not what they were hoping for, oftentimes it's the way you ask the question to the AI. So look, for some folks, they're still getting trained on how to ask the right question. But the way it consolidates, it provides links of studies in the literature where they can click in and read the study. So it's not making any decision. You know, there are some cheap shots at our AI that we've seen headlines are on. But when you have 3,000 unique users at the FDA on a daily basis, and we track it, and they don't have to use it, they're finding tremendous value in it.
Last question, just big picture. This is an agency that is not political. but you're operating in a highly political and partisan environment. I mean, even you mentioned Vinay Prasad. You had Laura Loomer online attacking him, saying he should be fired, calling him a progressive leftist saboteur that's not aligned with Trump's interests. I mean, how difficult is it to operate in an environment when even small staffing decisions are subject to political purity tests and partisan politics?
Well, there's not a political bone to his body. He's an impeccable scientist. I think one of the greatest scientific minds of our generation.
I only bring that up as an example of just, I'm not asking you to defend Prasad, but more, it's challenging right now. Clearly, everything is being sort of, picked apart by one side or another.
Well, it's usually in one direction. It's usually when a Republican nominee or a conservative is in office, then there's a level of scrutiny that you just don't see in prior administrations.
You're seeing it from the left and from the right.
In the prior administration, the person who Dr. Prasad replaced as director of that particular center had forced out the nation's two top vaccine experts because they did not agree with the COVID booster vaccine approval in young, healthy children. Now, there was an entire House Judiciary hearing on it where all this information came out. Not a wink of coverage from the media. Vinay Prasad has done a phenomenal job. His staff love him. The culture there is much improved. And we're seeing great decisions coming out of the FDA. Now,
how do you guarantee to people that politics isn't playing a part in the FDA's decisions?
Look, we're scientists. And so I remind our staff every day, we're all scientists. Let's avoid the partisan terminology. Let's not fool ourselves into saying that you're the independent, nonpartisan scientist and we're the political scientists. No, we're all scientists. We all want the same thing. The FDA has one of the greatest brands in the world. And so we've got to stand behind that brand.
Oh my goodness, Marty, you have a full plate. Thank you for taking time to talk about it all with us.
Good to be with you, Dasha. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Marty Makary, for joining the conversation. Now, in a moment, I'll be joined by a colleague of mine, my fellow White House reporter, Jake Traylor. He's got a great story out this week about how the president is going to get involved in the midterms. Now, he's not on the ballot, but he wants people to feel like he is. So we'll talk about their strategy to do that. We'll also talk to Jake about Epstein and how that is impacting the mood, the vibe inside of the White House. Here's my conversation with Jake Traylor. Jake, my friend, thank you so much for joining the conversation and on your birthday week of all weeks.
I'm happy to join. What a birthday gift to me. Thanks for having me, Dasha.
Happy birthday, Jake. So you have a really interesting story out this week about the president and the midterms. But before we get to that, I think we have to talk about the thing that we're all talking about this week, which is the nonstop Jeffrey Epstein plaguing the White House. The baseline is that the president is furious, as one source put it to me. He feels like he's been doing so much between, the two really heavy lifts in Congress between the big beautiful bill and the rescissions package, which whatever you make of those, it's impressive that they got that through on the Hill. And he's been making trade deals. He's like, I'm working many hours a day, and all anyone can talk about is this Epstein stuff. So he is incredibly frustrated. And one source I talked to told me, they've just never really seen the White House so paralyzed. You've covered Trump for a long time. Like, he's so good at turning the tables and at flipping the script. And he seems stuck here.
Yeah, and I mean, in fairness, like, they're trying. Like, obviously, we saw this week with Tulsi Gabbard in the briefing room trying to turn
they're trying.
the scandal on Obama and like go back to truly his oldest play in the book, which is like blame Obama for scandal of some kind. But look, I think when you said the word like paralyzed, that really sticks out. And I do think that kind of accurately represents the way we're seeing messaging from the White House right now. And to me, that's like because there is this pretty clear juxtaposition of this new reporting that we're seeing from the Wall Street Journal come out about in May. Pam Bondi told Trump essentially that they were going to release no more files. But then also last week we have Trump saying that he wanted testimony to be released and to be more transparent with some of these files. And so,
and Bondi telling Trump in May that his name was in the files, and that's now what they're having to contend with.
That's right. There's just like a clear juxtaposition here of when we're talking about, the White House is trying to move on. They are trying to move on, but it feels that what's happening behind the scenes and what's happening publicly are not really meshing. And so we're seeing them struggle to shake this one off.
Well, and that's opening the door to like more suspicion from both the MAGA base and now Democrats who have jumped on this. I mean, I think what's most striking here is the bond between the president and his base is unlike anything we've seen in the history of American politics, and it's a seemingly unbreakable bond that is a little fractured right now. There have been many rebellions, but this is a pretty pretty substantial one.
But they've been really quick to be whipped kind of back into place, and this is one of those ones, and it's because truly like this was something that Donald Trump and a lot of his base campaigned on. They built this momentum towards these Epstein files. You've created this kind of interest in these files. Now your people want you to do what you said you would do, which is release them all.
Right. One White House ally actually told me, they're really frustrated, and what makes the sting even worse is that this is kind of a problem of their own making. And the rollout between, Pam Bondi and the binders and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino out there, like this there were a number of unforced errors that just kind of made this whole thing worse. I don't think this is going away anytime soon. I'm sure we'll be talking more about it, but I do want to turn to your great reporting and to the midterms, which like seem far away, but like the machinations are already starting to happen. RNC Chair Michael Whatley is going to be running for Senate in North Carolina. Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, there was a lot of speculation if she was going to run. She decided she's going to stick at her gig at Fox News. And so both the president and Laura Trump and presumably the entire Republican establishment is going to be fully behind Whatley in what's going to be one of the more hotly contested races of the midterms. But Jake, you have reporting on just how involved the president wants to be here. What are you learning?
Yeah, I mean, this is true to Trump form, I would say, in terms of he loves to be kingmaker. I've been doing a lot of talking to White House officials in the past couple of weeks about what is this 2026 midterm strategy. It does, exactly as you said, it feels really far away, but it's not. In order to win in the Congress, he also has to have the candidates on the board that are loyal to him and that he believes really can win. Donald Trump, in the past couple of weeks, from some of the reporting I've done, has been making calls to a lot of elected officials, mainly a lot of current representatives in some swing districts in New York, in Iowa, in Michigan. And a lot of these individuals that he's calling have aspirations to run for higher office, whether it be for governor, for Senate, something of higher status. He's actually encouraging those individuals to stay in their races because Trump believes that they are the people most likely to hold that Republican seat in some of those swing district areas. And so we're seeing Donald Trump already behind the scenes before he's publicly endorsing, making some of these calls saying, I don't want you to run for governor. I don't want you to run for Senate. I want you to stay where you are.
Stay where you are. Let's play it safe here. What is the strategy vis-a-vis like what we saw Trump do in 2024? Like, are they going to use a similar playbook? How's that going to work if it's not actually Trump himself using that playbook? What are you hearing?
Yeah, when I was talking to a couple of people who are really involved in the political operation here, essentially what they said is if you want to look at 2026 and the success that we intend to have in 26, go back and look at 2024. They want to replicate that same political operation. And let me kind of remind some of our folks what that looks like. The 2024 campaign for Donald Trump was really focused on these low propensity voters. The classic like wear the t-shirt Democrats versus the classic like Republican Party. They were like, we lose in the fact that there are more classic Democrats in the party than Republicans. But they said where we win is we expand our base. We are not afraid to go and get these low propensity voters, these young Gen Z people who are not typically politically involved. We're going to find ways like they did in 2024, go on these younger podcasts, find mediums that maybe aren't the classic mainstream media types to go and get some of these voters and get them to vote. Now, the big thing, and I think this is actually going to be Donald Trump's largest hurdle, is I was told by White House officials the goal is, even though Donald Trump is not on the ballot in the midterms, obviously, the goal is to make him seem like he's on the ballot as much as possible. And of course, I asked, what does that look like? He's not going to physically be on the ballot. What they want to do is have a look ahead to the second half of Donald Trump's second term in 27 and 28, have policy that they've kind of proposed and pitched that they want to get through, and say the only way we're going to get this through is if you elect, these representatives, these senators. So as much as they can put Donald Trump on the ballot, even though he's not actually on the ballot, they also said Donald Trump has been itching to get out on the campaign trail.
I was going to say, is he going to go out and show up and rally?
He will, and we know that to be who he is. But I had a couple officials tell me that privately in meetings that were not about midterms, he's randomly brought up in the past couple of weeks, I want to get back out there. I want to be on the campaign trail. I want to rally. Where there should be some concern, I believe, among Republicans is in these swing districts where it is not the MAGA base or the Donald Trump that rules the Republican Party, and some of these more moderate swing districts, is getting Donald Trump's face out there actually the most strategic advantage for them, when a lot of them, these Republicans in these swing districts, actually kind of want to maybe caveat why they're a little different than Donald Trump? I don't know if some of these Republicans are going to be able to stop him from showing up and rallying, and ultimately, will that hurt or help them? I think that's a question that Republicans should be wrestling with.
Well, my friend, pack your bags. I have a feeling we're going to be back out on that trail doing a little repeat of our rally days.
Give me those hotel points. Come on.
Thank you so much, Jake.
Thanks, Dasha.
This has been The Conversation with Dasha Burns. We'll be back next week, and if you want to catch future episodes of The Conversation, just click that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.